Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Moms Like Me podcast powered by Support Now, where I have the opportunity rather to interview all types of moms that I admire for a variety of different reasons. And our guest today is certainly no exception. Today, I'm joined by Lindsay Garcia, who I've met more recently, but is just a wealth of knowledge with a disease that I was not, frankly, familiar with. And so my hope today for this podcast is to bring more awareness to this disorder, to this disease, and also just to share and spread the light that can come from navigating difficult situations like Lindsay has. Lindsay has taken on this not just as a mom, but as a leader of a nonprofit, which I find to be really incredible given just the depths in which both require so much time and energy. So with that, Lindsay, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So Lindsay, I'd love for you to share more of your own story in your own words to explain who you are and kind of like what brought you to this point.
I entered this world, I'd say of rarely diagnosed genetic conditions or, sick children or what have you, through my son. So my son was diagnosed with 22q11.2 deletion syndrome. It has many different names that preceded it, but everyone's kind of come to the same consensus that in order to spread awareness, we really need to come to a one-name campaign. So at my 20-week ultrasound, he was diagnosed after finding fluid on his kidneys and a heart defect. It kind of rocked our world. My husband and I had already had a daughter previously that was healthy, normal pregnancy. Had no idea what was ahead for us. We're really just kind of fear-stricken and overwhelmed by the new kind of path of our life. He was very medically fragile as a baby. He was in and out of the hospital for 17 weeks. He's had, 14. I've lost track. 14. Gone under anesthesia 14 times and had over 10 surgeries before the age of 5. He had a feeding tube for 5 years, was on oxygen for about 2 years. Very much of this is typical to a lot of kids with 22q, a lot of babies. They're already very much, babies are very fragile. We all know that. But then adding on the missing genetic piece really just kind of exacerbates everything. And so that's kind of like the intro to our journey.
Lindsay, I'd actually like to take it back to your pregnancy really quickly. When you got that news, describe kind of like what was the rest of your pregnancy like? It sounds like were there signals earlier on that something could have been off, or what did this happen at the anatomy scan? I think people are typically very curious about like, when did you know, and was there any even maternal instinct that led you to believe that something could be different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So being my second pregnancy, I kind of knew what to expect. I'd say around like 15 leading up to 20 weeks of the 20-week anatomy scan, I definitely was feeling like a lot heavier. Like I kind of felt like I was carrying twins, to be honest. I looked bigger. Of course, everyone, is just telling me not to worry. It's fine. Went into the 20-week ultrasound, and that's where we, of course, discovered the heart defect, which was a very common one associated with this condition, and fluid on the kidneys. And being that there were two systems affected, the doctors suggested that we do an amnio. We had never done prenatal testing with either of my children. But at that point, I'm a planner. I was a teacher at the time. I was like, I need to know as much information about what's to come and how to best plan for this baby. And that's what led us to do an amnio. And then we got the results around 24 weeks. So I'd say up until honestly that 20-week anatomy scan, I couldn't have told you anything was that much different. I didn't really have any kind of gut instinct. But after that, kind of it definitely was not a relaxing pregnancy following that 20-week ultrasound and getting those results.
Had you had or have you had friends that experienced similar challenges in pregnancy, or was this really your first experience with, oh wow, this baby, may be atypical or may not be as traditional as perhaps, I've come to realize for myself and for people around me?
Yeah, I didn't have too much experience, honestly. I had a few friends that did have miscarriages, unfortunately, and I myself had not. So this was kind of the first time in my inner circle and my family's circle of experiencing any kind of difference in, the fetus that we had ever seen before. So yeah, it wasn't just, affecting myself and my husband, but kind of all family members.
So you get the diagnosis confirmed at 24 weeks. What were some of the things you did to begin to cope and prepare, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, for this new normal that you knew was upon you?
Yeah, I'm a big kind of dive in deep to research. I feel like research and knowledge is power. And so my husband and I both just started reading everything we could about 22Q. We aligned ourselves with a nonprofit at the time called the Dempster Family Foundation. It's a famous baseball player who has a child with 22Q, and they were about 6 years ahead of us with having a 6-year-old. And they actually were in Chicago, which is where we were at the time. So we kind of felt this like normalcy around it. Once my husband found out that a famous baseball player, even though I did not know who Ryan Dempster was at the time, it was honestly like a breakthrough moment for us of like, okay, this is a celebrity that has this. Like it normalized it a little bit because 22Q, that whole name that I shared earlier is so scientific sounding, and it sounds really intense, and you don't really know what to expect when you hear that name. So it was kind of normalized it in a sense as far as that we were going to be able to get through this. There was a foundation, that was established. So yeah, lots of research. I also met with the cardiology team at our children's hospital at Lurie Children's in Chicago. Got to meet with the whole team because the impression was that my son would be needing open heart surgery immediately after birth, which is actually ironically not what happened, but we had kind of a whole team in place. And so, not to be TMI, but when my water broke,
We like
we
TMI here, Lindsay. It's okay.
great. Well, I'm all about it. So the local hospital, we were in the city, but even though we're 3 miles from the Children's Hospital of Chicago, with traffic, it can be kind of insane. So the closer hospital that did not even have a NICU facility at all or any type of treatment for babies, especially babies with genetic conditions, they were going to try to take us into that hospital. That when the paramedics came, and I basically had to look at them in the eyes. These really, I feel like I still remember their faces. It's ingrained in my mind. I'm sitting on my bathroom floor, and they're like, "Well, we're going to go to this hospital." I said, "No, you're taking me to Children's because there's a whole team waiting for him. He has 22Q." And they're like, "What is that?" And got really wide eyed. And I said, "He's going to need open heart surgery immediately." And so they made the executive decision. They called the team. They're like, "Yep, there's people waiting for you." And of course, wheeling me in, it was like a scene from ER. There were probably 30 people there waiting for us, which was intense. But honestly, when you're pregnant, as people that are probably listening to this that have had babies, you kind of just block all that out.
Yeah.
I wasn't really aware of that till after the fact. So
Well, and I think what you mentioned though is also just like a really beautiful testament to learning how to advocate early. I mean, it sounds like you said earlier, for you, knowledge is power, and you really use that to best advocate for your health, for his health, so that you could have potentially the most like seamless experience, or with the least amount of consequences, negative consequences possible. But I do think that's a really important thing that you just said, is that there is value. While you can be sad and shocked, there is value in learning what you can learn so that you can best equip yourself to make decisions on the types of doctors and delivery and what hospitals, so that you and your support team is ready.
yeah, and honestly, looking back, that was probably the first time my entry into just the advocacy aspect of this, of having a child with differences. I was always, before my son, a rule follower, always a ask for permission type of person. He is, I'd say, over the years, really changed me into a ask for forgiveness kind of person. I don't really take no for an answer. You really have to go above and beyond for our kids, especially when you're dealing with a diagnosis or a condition like 22Q. And even though it is very common, it's so rarely known about or diagnosed.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Why? Like, again, I think people are familiar with Down syndrome. We're familiar. There are some disorders out there that people have just kind of adopted and understand in common culture. Why is 22Q kind of less understood in our culture today?
Yeah. So, obviously, before having my son, I had never heard of it. And now it's just ironic. The degrees of separation are getting smaller and smaller when I hear about people that are having their children diagnosed. So first and foremost, it's a spectrum disorder. It is a genetic spectrum disorder. So 80 to 90% of the time it's passed, it is de novo, meaning it's new, a new malfunction, basically. I'm not using the proper terminology, that happens while pregnant. There's really a small percentage of the time that it's passed down internally from the family, if that makes sense. It is 1 in 2,000 to 4,000 births. and there's about 200 plus features that are apparent on an individual. Not everyone has all of them, but they're all mild to moderate to severe. It really depends how it affects each and every individual. So for example, like skeletally, someone can have minimal like skeletal differences and maybe just need foot orthotics to needing full-on surgery for maybe scoliosis. And that's just one example. Obviously, because it's a spectrum or because it's a genetic condition, it affects all systems in the body. And so because of that, if someone is going to their doctor and trying to get diagnosed, where there's obviously some commonalities with the condition, which I can share. But unless you're really in front of a doctor that has seen this before, it's really hard to diagnose. Typically, a lot of our kids, as geneticists told me when I was pregnant trying to learn more about this, these kids typically look like their family, in a family photo, but they also look like a little different. And when you put them next to others that have 22q, I mean, they look like they're related. It's just intense. So a lot of mild facial differences, but the common things that we see with this condition are that 75% of children have some type of heart defect with this. So that was kind of a red flag for me, obviously, with my prenatal testing stuff that we had done. Cleft palate, 75% of the time they have a cleft palate difference. Now that could be, as mild as being like hypernasal and like the anatomy to having like a cleft lip or a full cleft palate that needs repair. Trying to think of speech and feeding is a huge struggle. So 35 to 40% of our kids either struggle with feeding or speech development as they get older. And also immune systems are usually pretty weak and compromised. So some, like another example of the spectrum of this, we have some that what we constitute as complete DeGeorge, and that's kind of one of the old school terminology names. The condition was originally founded by Dr. DeGeorge, who saw that these patients were born with heart defects, but also missing thymuses or like very weak thymus activity. So we have those patients that, they're in line at Duke to get full thymus transplants, and they're basically living in complete isolation. The whole family is.
Wow.
To mildly affected, I would say my son was more on the mildly affected as far as immune goes. When he gets a cold, it's not a normal like weak cold like we see in kids his age, but it'll sometimes keep him home for like 2 to 3 weeks. And then middle of that would be, someone that's constantly in the hospital for pneumonia. So it really depends. But basically, to sum that up, with these 200 features and being such a spectrum of them, unless you've seen a patient with this before, with some of these mild, facial differences, some heart defects, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, it's very challenging for them to diagnose just in the office, and it really it goes down to getting a blood test.
Yeah. I've heard that pretty often when I talk to medical mamas, that just how little, certainly a pediatrician, but even higher level doctors will know about these more specific disorders, which just means like the onus is shifted to the parents to do the fact finding, to do the discovery. Where did you go to do your research? Were there certain websites? Were there certain support groups? Like, how did you start doing your due diligence on this so you could be better educated and certainly to be able to support him better?
Yeah, definitely. I turned to Facebook. There's a ton of support groups on Facebook. I'm a little bit of a support group junkie, to be honest. Like through different aspects of his life, I've leaned on it. When he had a feeding tube, I joined the feeding tube support group. And these are people that don't, have 22q. Just they all have kids that have feeding tubes. Facebook support groups are really helpful. And then the foundation that I mentioned before, the Dempster Family Foundation, and that's actually the foundation that we took over for when we started our foundation. But they were a wealth of knowledge. They had, FAQs on kind of some of the common features that I shared earlier. And they had some built-in programming. They did some family connection aspects. So those were, I'd say, the two major resources that I kind of accessed.
And then I want to go back to your timeline. So he was born. You said there was no open heart surgery. What did the weeks and months ahead look like, for you as a family?
Yeah, so born actually with better APGAR scores than my daughter, ironically, was pink. He was supposed to come out blue, and it was then determined after they did his echo after he was born that he actually didn't have this pretty intense heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot, which is very common with this condition. But he had just a VSD, which honestly, a lot of people are just born with a small hole in their heart, and it's never needed repair. With that being said, even with all the information, the diagnosis up front, us doing our due diligence of, kind of looking at, even because there's even managing guidelines now for this condition. So right when patients are born, they can provide them to their doctors if like they're in a more rural area or even just a, urban area that doesn't know. Managing guidelines that will check off things to check for at, 3 months, 6 months, and then of course by the year, for doctors to kind of follow, because there are certain things you have to watch out for, like calcium dropping, things like that. So with that being said, the good news was I had all the research up front, but even with that, it was really a nightmare. I think because he was so multifaceted in the sense of how 22q affected his systems, that there was just a lot of finger pointing from specialists. I had to actually call a few care conferences myself, which I never thought I would have to do as a 30-year-old young mom. But it was a lot of finger pointing. The heart is the issue. This is the issue. We were in and out of the hospital about every 3 weeks with 2 weeks at home. They just could not figure out why he kept kind of plateauing. And it ended up being that he coded twice. And they're like, okay, we need to really kind of stop pointing fingers and address the situation. And it was determined that just because so many different systems were affected, it was a little bit of everything that added up to kind of a perfect storm. So the first 17 weeks of his life were very intense. It's really honestly hard to even remember. But after that, he came home and we really just started kind of hitting the ground running with tons of intense in-home intervention through our Early Start program in Illinois. He had therapy every single day in our house. And from pretty much 4 months on, unless it was a scheduled procedure, he's, knock on wood, has never had to be hospitalized without something that was.
So Lindsay, you talk about all the support, the therapies for him. How the heck have you been able to support yourself emotionally, spiritually throughout all of this, especially playing clearly not just being a mom, but truly being a caregiver to him?
As I mentioned before, very much a type A person before having him. So for me, the lack of control and the loss of control and expectations that I had for my family and what this, journey was going to look like for us. I'm to the point now where I don't cry about that, but that was by far one of the hardest things, was just the way that I had viewed my life, and the turn that it made. Obviously, just was unexpected. So I decided to kind of throw myself full force. And if I can't control my own situation, at least I can help others. And that's what kind of led me to open the 22Q Family Foundation in 2016. It's been such a blessing for me because, even though we have our ups and downs with our own kid, I'm able to at least use my own experience, build connections with medical providers and clinics across the country that are helping support our community, and get resources and programs built around our foundation to be able to support families from diagnosis through adulthood, which at the end of it, I think looking back when I received that diagnosis, that was the one thing that was just so overwhelming to me, is like, I need support. Where am I going to find support? And I found support in some areas, but being able to turn to a foundation that had all the things lined up, that's kind of my ultimate goal. And that's what honestly brings me joy and a little bit of peace, is able to give back and helping out others and connecting with others. Because quite honestly, a lot of these people that I've met through running the foundation are some of my best friends. They understand my journey and what I've been through on a whole nother level that, some of my closest friends and family will never really understand.
And what were you doing professionally before all of this?
I was a teacher. I was an elementary school teacher.
So advocating for children in a different way, and you just kind of shifted gears towards not just your child, but this. And you probably didn't even notice that you did this. You talk about our kids. When you talk about 22Q, our kids look like this. Our kids have that, which just shows, I think, truly like the responsibility and the ownership that you feel towards helping not just the kids, but the families as well. It's a really subtle thing that you do, but I think it's really telling of how you show up. How was your husband with this? Was he faster to say, we're gonna be fine? I'm gonna, maybe it's not exactly what we thought it was gonna look like, but so be it. Has it been more challenging for him emotionally? I think sometimes the dads get overlooked because the mom goes through so much physically and hormonally. But do you mind sharing a little bit more about him and y'all's relationship as a result of this?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because what I shared a few minutes back, when we got that diagnosis, so I can still remember sitting on our couch. My daughter was at school and I was a just emotional mess. And he, dads and husbands and men tend to be fixers, and women are sometimes stereotypically the warriors. So I was worrying, and it was right when he grabbed my hand and when he mentioned that I think once he found out that Ryan Dubster, this baseball player, had a child with this sense of like relief came over him, which made me relieved. So he, I'd say from day one, has always been so accepting, way more accepting than me. But I think his personality lends itself to that. That was not my personality, and he's really hit the ground running. He is just such a giving person, and he's, similar to what I've done with the foundation. He took a little bit longer to kind of, I'd say, fully like grieve, but he again also wants to put it back into the community. And so for him, after seeing my son grow up over these years, he's 11 now. He's kind of harnessed in him baseball, and he's very much he can do whatever he wants person. I'm more of a realist because we do have a lot of things that come with this condition that are scary, a lot of mental health things that are down the road that we don't know if they'll be happening or not for our son. But my husband's very much a believer of, we're going to treat him as typical as we can and give him access to all the things. And so just a few years back, my husband actually started an adaptive baseball league in our small town in Colorado. It started with just 2 teams. He posted it on a Thursday night, and the teams were full the next morning. We're talking 6
Wow.
hours. 30 people, and now we're up to 4 teams, and this coming year should be 6 teams. And of course, most of these people, actually all of them, do not have 22Q, but I think for him it's been a sense of giving back and showing Cohen and kind of building the sense of community around him. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but he was very much always kind of on board with everything. But I will say I've met quite a few moms. We offer moms retreats through our foundation. And I've talked to a lot of moms who the dads are really struggling. I think everyone in this grieving process of losing like a neurotypical child and like this typical lifestyle and family that you thought you had, it really isn't just like done, especially with this condition, because there's so many ups and downs with surgeries on the horizon and mental health on the horizon and not knowing if our kids are going to live independently or not. It's not as clear cut as say like a condition like Down syndrome. So because of that, we kind of go through these cycles of grief, and they're up and down. And, I think everyone deals with them differently, but dads, sometimes theirs hit a little bit later. They kind of like go into fixer mode, and then when their kid grows a little bit longer, then they're realizing like, oh, they need more support. Oh, they're showing more differences in their peers. It becomes a little bit harder for them.
Yeah, and I think this is such a great example about what grief really means. I think culturally we think of grief as loss and loss alone, and what people fail to realize is grief is really the absence of what you thought you were going to have. And like you said, you can go through waves of it, and I'm sure it hits at different points in time, from playing baseball to seeing kids go to school to watching your daughter thrive in different ways. I would imagine you almost like never know what's going to trigger that grief, because you also have an older daughter that, from what you've shared with me so far, is living a kind of neurotypical life. Is that right?
Yes.
And how is she with him?
She's doing good. She's, doing better. She missed a lot of those hard times early on because she was only 2.5. But it was interesting because she would think it was weird or off-putting for her to see like a mother breastfeeding in public, because she was used to her brother being fed by a feeding tube. So her sense of normalcy is very offset. Just like one example, as she's gotten older and he's gotten older, his behavior and some of his needs have ebbed and flowed and changed. It's not like the needs have just gone away and we're just living this like really easy life. But as she's getting older, she's definitely shown, I'd say, more, not resentment is not the word, but making it more known that like she doesn't like this situation. It's not fair to him, but it's not fair to her. So we've been, doing our part to get her and to see, therapists and stuff to help with that, because that's one thing that people don't realize is they'll shower like the kid. And this is just my own personal experience, but they'll shower the kid or the individual or the adult that has the condition, but we forget about the other people that are in the family. Diagnosis affects everyone in the family, and sometimes
Yeah.
the siblings have forgotten. And so my husband and I really try to go above and beyond to make sure that she has her own separate time, because it is challenging, being in this household.
I also want to thank you for your honesty on that. I know it's not easy. None of this is easy. And if you have a situation, there's certainly siblings that that's their best friend and they love it. And it's very natural. And I'm not gonna say there's no disruption, but like this is all they know. And therefore they're super accepting. I think it's really important for moms that are listening to this that if they have a kid that is struggling with this because it is different and it's not also what they maybe see from their other friendships and relationships that they have with their siblings, it's just so important to like highlight that and to say like it's okay. And also I think it just shines a light, Lindsay, on just how exhausting this whole experience is because you're not just caring for your son, you're having to care for yourself, your husband certainly, but also to nurture your daughter in a way that gives her space to acknowledge her emotions while also trying to build and strengthen their relationship. And that is something that I think unless you have the situation, it's just super hard to empathize with. But I'd imagine like those are the things that keep you up at night because that's your family unit. This is your family. And you wanna do right by everyone to make sure that they go on to live really, happy and productive lives, whatever that might look like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like having a child with differences like this, it's, you go from just being mom or dad to wearing all the hats, we always talk about that at the foundation. Like you're the pharmacist, you're the advocate, you're the teacher, you're the researcher, and then of course tackle on you have additional kids and their own needs. That becomes another layer, and it can be very overwhelming. And sometimes you just have to not go down the rabbit hole of research and just be like, hey, we're just gonna
be here today. We're just gonna live for today. All right, so Lindsay, as we wrap up, please tell everyone more about the foundation.
Yeah, so our foundation is called 22Q Family Foundation. We opened in 2016, and our goal is to raise awareness for 22Q while supporting families and individuals that are affected by it and providing accurate information. We offer a variety of free educational consulting services, scholarships for those that go to college, career coaching, and opportunities for families to connect in person and online. We really try to focus on awareness, education, and connection. And I feel like those three categories really encompass like everything that someone kind of needs if they have a child diagnosed with 22Q.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Again, the one of the primary goals of this podcast is, even if we reach one person that knows someone with 22Q, that they feel that they are getting closer to the resources they need, the voices they need to listen to. So thank you so much for everything that you do. As a parting note, part of our passion behind this as well is to serve these families. So for anyone who's listening who knows someone that is experiencing this or may have just gotten a diagnosis, we encourage you to explore Support Now as an option, not just to find grants, but to also potentially fundraise or organize meals, coordinate volunteers, and share updates. Because like Lindsay mentioned, this journey is long and your needs evolve. And people want to do things. They want to help. And our hope is that Support Now can just reduce a little bit of the overwhelm that families feel when they're on this journey. So Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to share this resource within the Support Now community and beyond, and look forward to many more conversations together.
Thank you so much.